where we had this week training on renewable energy financing. And my background is mostly banking. I spent almost 20 years at EBRD, but also worked in the private sector in mergers and acquisitions. And more recently, I moved to training of commercial banks, mostly in developing countries. Christine?
Hello, my name is Christine Frühling. I'm working for the Frankfurt School and the Executive Education Department. Sorry, I was just distracted. I use also the time to tell you that I just sent the term sheet, which will help to follow the one. But I was also supporting Laurent and Elodie in the training. And yes, I'm looking forward because today's session is an interesting one in a way. It's really technical and in a way boring, but we hope we still make it really entertaining for you. So looking forward.
And I'm Elodie, working together with Christine and Laurent on this training series, working as a project coordinator. I was in touch with some of you already, so it's nice to have you again and see you again. Before we start, just to position ourselves in this climate finance training series. So as you remember, we are adopting a blended learning approach where we have a mix of online sessions and on-site sessions as well. So we already had 2 online sessions in June this year, mainly to give you a bit of background and to make sure that you're aligned before the on-site workshop that happened in Paris at the beginning of July. So where we are now, we are after the on-site training. We are currently organizing the online session number 3, which is really a post training webinar following the on-site, as you will see, very practical. And then the last 2 sessions will be organized, one at the end of November and the other one at the beginning of December, both by the International Energy Agency. And then the end of the year will be done with this training series, and I will assess how we'll do next year. And now, without further ado, we will start with today's session, which is on renewable energy investments, processing methodology. Just quickly on the agenda. So we will go over a bit of background and context, going back to what we've learned so far, and then we'll deep dive into the investment development process with all the due diligence process you will see, and at the end we will focus on the term sheet. And as Christine mentioned, the term sheet has been sent to you via email today, so that you can also familiarize yourself a little bit and follow at the same time. And now I will leave the floor.
Thank you, Elodie. It's as Christine already said, I'm very interactive. And please do not hesitate to ask questions. So to maybe complement with examples from your effective experience in dealing with renewable energy financing, or more specifically the processing of these investments. So now what we will be covering, the next one, yeah. So in fact, what we'll be doing here is to discuss the processing of renewable energy projects, but really taking it from the perspective of what we call project finance. We will see later what it refers to by reference to corporate finance, and what it entails in terms of exposure to any kind of risk. But the first message here is really much to say that what you will be maybe not learning, because you are I guess for most of you very familiar with this process, However, we will try to outline and stress the differences between a normal or usual project finance project and those of them which qualify as renewable energy investments, because you will see that there are a few differences that we will try to capture in the processing of the project when referring to a lender. And now what we will be doing, we will be exposing the approach that is usually adopted by banks when they review a project before considering an investment. And we will be seeing not only this kind of sequence of events, but also the deliverables, meaning the documents that you will be preparing as a lender, which for most of them constitute a milestone associated to an internal decision process within your bank and possibly documented in your operational manual. Then next slide. The context for us. And obviously, oops, it's coming, sorry. Then we have then to reflect on what we learned, was it back in July, which maybe somehow explain the reason why some lenders are, I would say, somehow hesitant or caution whether they will invest or not directly into a renewable energy project, but more importantly, take what we call project risk. First, ironically, although we all heard of renewable energy for now quite a while, it's fair to say that many projects haven't yet reached what we call full operational cycle. I think the best example will be to take PV solar and photovoltaic projects. And I guess it's fair to say that like 5 years ago, we were not yet having all these large utility scale projects. And if you think at the maturity or the duration of the expected financing, which is more kind of 15 years or 20 years even, I think it's fair to say that in this particular technology, like PV solar, we haven't yet reached a time where we could draw full conclusions from a PV project going from inception, like the first attempt to finance, till the decommissioning of the plant. And we will see, I could give you examples that today, for example, subject like decommissioning of PV plants, how we handle all the panels when they are not any longer in use, what do we do with the waste? These are questions at the end that we just start asking ourselves. And by the way, I saw that recently the IEA, International Energy Agency, has been publishing some documents on it, because it's becoming a subject of interest. But it's just to show that, in all fairness for lenders, not all technologies have gone through the whole, what I would call operational cycle, meaning that it's fair that some banks are a bit still cautious about investment. Second, there is still uncertainty in the regulatory framework. Here we refer to the price, to the dispatch, to anything which might not give lenders full confidence whether a market is mature or not. I think at the conclusion, we could really confirm that on your side as a lender, renewable energy still carries some specific risk and require on your side a specific appraisal process. So to be sure that the investments are sound and could be eligible for your financing. On the other hand, and this is the last thing we need to mention as a takeaway from July, it's true that by culture, many banks are also used to having certain level of collaterals and certain level of recourse. By the way, in certain countries, it's imposed by regulation. which again could act as a deterrent to taking some project risk, because by regulation you are meant to have collateral. Then why taking project risk where in a sense you have arranged a lending which is similar to a mortgage or to a collateral-based loan rather than a project finance or pure project finance project. Then further conclusions which explain why there is still some hope on surely there is definitely today for lenders the possibility of getting exposed directly to project risk. First, we learned in July that you could assess and measure with tools. You might remember we discussed the famous P50, P75, the way lenders will assess intermittence, uncertainty. So over time, on this, I think has been the case for the last 10 or 15 years, lenders have developed approaches which makes them able now to assess and measure the risks that they will be effectively taking, whilst at the same time still remaining compliant with their policies on avoiding excessive provisioning, because obviously not only, and this is what we were just mentioning before, is it problematic for you to take project risk, but it's also very costly for you as a lender, because by being directly exposed to the project, you have to set aside higher level of provision, which might, by the way, be problematic for your balance sheet as a lender. Anyway, in the recent past, there have been successful attempts to take direct project risk exposure, and we will see how this has been done. And one of the answers to this question is, in fact, to look at the process which has been implemented by banks to successfully appraise any of the investments. Now let's move to the process, except if anyone has a question, but we will go through the effective process. Okay, here it is. So you might have already, as I said, internally this type of I would say diagram equivalent. I remember where I used to work, and it was organized like a cycle. Then we were going from like a clock from noon to midnight, on each time going step by step through the process. But basically, what we lay down here is a process that goes from left to right, and you could see the time passing whereby the bank will be, in fact, going through various steps which will allow the teams within the bank to appraise the project and to reach a conclusion. And we will see later, we spend a lot of time on the last step, which is called term sheet, but we'll explain why. But now you have all these very colorful and very nice steps, and we will describe each of them, spending though a little bit less time on the Excel model, because it's not like a document per se, it's more like a spreadsheet, and we spent quite a lot of time back in July. Then you could go back to the July training to look at it. Then we will describe each of these steps and the associated document that you will be developing throughout. The first one is what we call the mandate letter. So what is a mandate letter? So in fact, we refer here to a contract which will be prepared by you, the bank, because you will be the one forcing, if I may say, the signature of this contract with your prospect, with your future client. And I must say that from experience, I discovered that very often, unfortunately, this mandate letter are driven by the lead financer. Could it be the IDFC? Could it be the EBRD? at the expense of co-finances. So here you will see later, I will refer to certain things that you may want to impose as well as a co-financer in the negotiation of this contract between then the banks with an S and on the future project developer. But what is the purpose of a mandate letter? Now, what we are trying to clarify here is the terms and conditions of your engagement prior to signing the loan agreement. Because as you could appreciate, before the loan agreement is in place, there is a need to clarify what will be the condition at which you will engage. It's important not only to cover yourselves in terms of expenses, but also, and this is possibly the most important point, to preserve your reputation and make sure that everything you brought to the table in terms of knowledge is protected. And again, reflecting on just my personal experience, very often I have seen clients seeking, when I was at EBRD, to get EBRD to prepare a term sheet. We will come back to that given document. And then the client will be using the term sheet to go to see other banks and to try to secure better conditions. Obviously, it's totally unfair because you will have spent a lot of time doing your due diligence, preparing your financial model, and preparing the term sheet. And then you realize that this client has used all this knowledge to try to secure better condition, and even worse, using the bank name as somehow a reason why other lenders must be confident about investing. And they will be saying, look, EBRD offered me that, which is first confirming that the project is sound, one tick. Second, EBRD offers me this condition. Could you do better? Then obviously, what you will be trying to do in the mandate letter is to prevent such a risk by making sure that your client is, for example, prevented from using the term sheet without your consent. You might also want to have specific copyrights on the document you prepare, but there will be also the same requirements from the client that might share with you, give you an example, some data related to the project. Then here in the mandate letter, the client you will say, look, my technical data are proprietary. I don't want you, the bank, to share it with anyone. Then having that document clarify a lot of things. And going back to the danger of working somehow, danger is possibly not the appropriate word, but the need to make sure that you entertain good relationships with the co-finances. You will see a lot of co-finances trying to impose in the mandate letter their own terms, then basically saying it will be IFC or EBRD to decide what will be done with the term sheet, which is a bit unfair. No, it should be the decision of all the lenders who were involved in the assessment of the project, not only one. The same will happen, and this is on the cost sharing. You will see many lenders try to get as much money extracted from the deal before the signing. And here again, the mandate letter will help you agree among co-financers who is getting what to cover for the cost of the appraisal. And don't underestimate that the costs we are talking about are not only the costs associated to consultants and external costs, it's also your cost in terms of the time you spent in working on the document or on the preparation of a project, but also the opportunities that you lost, because working on project A means that you have worked on project B, which is for the bank possibly an opportunity which was lost. So this is why a mandate letter is important and why usually it will be signed prior to incurring any substantial cost. Then the next step, except if we have questions on the mandate letter, you check the thing. No, okay, good. Or you interrupt us using the microphone. Do not hesitate if you have any questions or would like to add something from your experience. Next step will be when a mandate letter is signed, usually the lenders will have already set the expected due diligence that they foresee for the project. Then what do we call due diligence? In our case, will be the very similar assessment that you will be considering for any investments, except, and we will see it now, that there will be some areas very specific to renewable. And with your due diligence, you will have then define where you would like to spend your time and your attention, but might be also where you will need to involve external consultants. Again, back to this mandate letter, you better clarify with your client that you require external consultant so that this client accepts to bear the cost of such a consultant, because it can't be at your expenses since the deal is not yet signed. Then we split the due diligence into two parts. Some parts are what we call generic, because they apply to any project, and this will be by reference to your own policies, on own guidances. Then you will have the usual KYC. You need to know with whom you are working, then what is the level of integrity, do this client meet your requirements? For example, national banks or international regional banks would need the sponsor to be established, or maybe the project to be located in a given place or not the other. There will be surely specific requirements in terms of compliance with environmental and social regulation. You might adopt the World Bank standard, for example, then you will have to check that the project is compliant. There will be also all the things which are more or closely related to financing. We're talking about technical and contractual matters, financial and legal, but all these things that we call generic are similar to any kind of project. But today, we would like obviously to spend more time on what makes renewable energy different from the others. Then, ironically, although renewable sounds green and sounds nice, the irony is that there might be an additional need or a sensitivity to environmental and social consideration. Something which always, by the way, surprised me, because I would have thought that everybody will welcome PV panels or wind farms. But in the contrary, lessons learned is that expectation from the population, or maybe from the regulators or some of the government, is almost higher. Why is that? It's just because people would not accept that a green investment or sustainable investment is not virtuous on any respect. Then it's not a surprise where, although you might think that doing a PV project is already good enough, it might be that still people will ask you about the way the local population is involved in the project and the way gender consideration has been taken into account. Then there will be an enhanced, I would say, ENS attention, which will then call on additional, possibly due diligence, but surely on your side, additional attention. Second, you might remember that we based all our project appraisal on this P50, P90 scenarios, which was this idea of trying to measure and quantify this uncertainty. Then to do it, we will have to call consultants, which are extremely, I would say, knowledgeable, but very niche market people that will confirm the resource assessment that were presented by your client. Because what happened is that you as a lender will use this data to project the loan repayment, but also to determine your exposure. And the need to have a dedicated due diligence, at least to check and to confirm that these data are indeed acceptable or meet your requirements in terms of quality. Another area will be, and you might also recall, we explain how dispatch and offtake is of an issue for renewable energy. And we spoke about curtailment, on the fact that there is these days in particular very often issues associated with congestion, the fact that all the plants produce at the same time and supply the same substation, which then make it untenable for the system, which then has to handle it through curtailments. And again, you will have technical experts that will check that all the conditions are met for your plant to produce. And finally, you will have, and we will go back to this given point, an attention to who is developing the project, what is the expertise of these people, because unlike other sectors, we've seen in the recent past many newcomers which competence could be questioned. And again, it will be one area of concern for you during your due diligence. Now, maybe, Elodie, if you don't mind, could we go back to the diagram with the time line? Because when we move then to the term sheet with the timeline with this colorful thing, again before, okay. Because now we will be moving to term sheets, and I will explain what it is. And here you've seen we've been through the mandate letter, step 1, which is everything you need to begin your project appraisal. So you are somehow at that stage laying the foundations that will enable you as a lender to process your project. We developed what is in the green box, due diligence. So we explain the areas of concern, generic or specific to renewable. In the middle, you have all the processing of the financial informations. That one, we thought it back in July with the financial model on the scenarios. You might remember we did some exercise on various cases. But ultimately, everything feeding into the term sheet. And now we could go back to our slide, and we will try to elaborate a bit more on what it is and what it contains, how is it developed, and if it's a must or not. Now, first question for ourselves, what is the importance of a term sheet? And in fact, you will realize, if you are familiar with it, you definitely have seen it, that it's really very much the milestone which marks the fulfillment of the completion of the overall appraisal process. Basically, before the term sheet is signed between you, lender, and your client, it's still work in progress, and everything is subject to change. However, when the term sheet is signed, you signal both to your client and internally to the bank that the project, seen from your perspective as a banker, could be financed. And it's only one step missing for you as a lender, which is your board approval. Usually, board approval will happen, obviously, only when the term sheet is signed. Could be when the legal docs are prepared or just before, but definitely no board approval without a term sheet being agreed and everybody having signed off on the term sheet. Then it's very important for the bank, and it's a kind of pivotal milestone for your process and for the decision that the bank will have taken on the one hand, and for the project developer to consider your financing. Now that we saw the importance of the term sheet, what is the content of it? And here you have seen now the document that Christine shared with you, but you will see that it contains all the key informations regarding the terms and conditions of the future loan. And a template like the one you've seen would usually list all the bank generic requirements. Then to illustrate, if your bank has specific requirements regarding a borrower, the template of the term sheet will reflect it so that there is no confusion or no misunderstanding with your client, and straight away client is made aware that this is your requirement and you impose that as a condition for your financing, and then this will be listed. And in addition to the generic requirements, the term sheet will also reflect the specific requirements arising from your due diligence and from renewable energy project investment requirements that you may have. Then, as a document, it's really much like a bridge between the previous steps that we mentioned, the due diligence, then all the work you will have done to appraise and assess the project, and it comes before the loan negotiation. Then, in summary, it's a key milestone that make a bridge between all the other work before, where you assess the project, and at the time the term sheet is signed, it's the last step before you start developing the loan documents on the legal docs, as we call them. Now we've seen what it is, why is it important. Now, how is it developed? In fact, who is holding the pen and who is in charge of drafting it? And before we do that, there is in the term sheet an important consideration that because the people who will be developing it are business people, the language must be those spoken by these people. Then it's very synthetic, and it's a language that helps the banker clarify its requirement. The client understands the requirement so that the two parties could agree. Then, ideally, in a document like a term sheet, will be time to avoid, I would say, what we call the subjective language, very much like lawyer style, subject to materiality test, except otherwise. All these things must be avoided, so to focus on the requirement to make sure that people understand each other, and you leave to the lawyer to embellish the thing and put all the additional language that you as a banker might not find necessary, but for sure will dilute your requirement and not help you reach a clear understanding with your client. Then this is what you will be trying to do, but you have also to appreciate that lawyers will use this document as their kind of the French way, feuille de route, and it will be the document that lawyers will be using for drafting the legal docs. And they should also still include enough to make sure that you lawyers do not get confused and could directly draft the clause that match your expectations. The last thing about the drafting is that it should be clear enough and detailed enough so that you don't leave any issue open and you don't wait till you have your legal docs to discover that you have a deal breaker. Then basically, even if your bonus or your reward might be connected to the term sheet signing, it's still much better to raise the issue at the term sheet negotiation than waiting for the legal docs to be drafted, at least for two reasons. One we will see later is that it takes much more time to negotiate on a legal document. But second, internally to your bank, you might already have secured board approval on your term sheet, and it will be extremely difficult to go back to the board with an additional requirement. So basically, if you have forgotten something and there is a deal breaker, your board won't be happy to learn about it after they approve the deal. And then going back to this drafting process, and we will have you. Then sorry, it's not meant to be an impersonation of a banker, but it's like a typical banker. Then the banker I mean, everybody's much prettier than that, no doubt, but you could see the banker likes the money and got a calculator. So the banker is in charge of the term sheet drafting and is very much at the heart of the whole thing. The first thing the banker will be doing is to interact with a renewable energy project developer. That's why it's a funny guy in green obsessed by solar energy and wind turbines. Then banker at the center of the process and is the only one who interact with the client. And why is it very important? It's because it ensures that all the requirements are focused and could be somehow aggregated by a single person. So to avoid to have parallel negotiation among, let's say, environmental specialists, credit officers, then you end up having a Christmas tree of requirement with no consistency. So then very important to keep the banker at the heart of the system. And this banker will be also interacting with colleagues. And for instance, this is the lady representing the support team. And then there will be interactions with credit, legal, ENS expert, so that you ensure as a banker that all the bank requirements are taken into account, and you also coordinate the due diligence, the financial model preparation, and the scientific cases analysis. And everything fall onto the banker, who in fact will be drafting the term sheet, taking account of these various inputs. And now, is there an alternative to drafting a term sheet? There is one, surely, but it comes with some drawbacks. In fact, the alternatives that you've seen and I've experienced it in my case on several occasions. It's clearly not ideal. It's to draft legal docs, in that case, loan agreement, directly, and then avoid drafting a term sheet, which give a false impression of having a legal document already ready, but the thing is that because your client will still be negotiating it, which is quite normal, except if you have like standard terms and conditions, but it will only be applied to corporate loans. But surely it doesn't really apply to project finance, where you have to do a kind of tailor-made approach. You end up having your lawyer at the center of the system, unlike the banker we've seen. And lawyers are usually not used nor qualified to be interacting with all these people. Second, it creates a real conflict of interest and responsibility within your bank, in a sense that the legal team is meant to protect the interest of the bank from the legal perspective, but not to do it from the credit or from other perspectives. Hence, creating an issue in a sense that you expose your lawyer to having a conflict of interest. And the last point is related to time and money. Because you will be therefore developing legal docs every time, unlike a simple clause of a term sheet where you change a word before you negotiate with your client, if you negotiate legal docs, normally legal teams will not accept to release legal documents in a version which is not fully developed. So basically, they will not accept to change one term without reviewing everything. And you can't entertain to have 10 versions of legal docs, and you end up having 1, 2, or 3 versions where you have still pending issue on hold, not agreed, at the expense of your client. It's taking also a lot of time, then surely, in particular for project finance / renewable energy project, it's not advisable at all to consider directly drafting the loan agreements. Then now, I guess we've been through the key questions related to a term sheet, and then we could move to the term sheet template itself. Do colleagues have a question, or would you like to intervene?
Maybe I'll ask.
We just ask, just a break to see if there are any questions, if someone maybe wants to share their own experience of processing of due diligence process, drafting term sheet would also be interesting to hear your feedback and your experience on this. Or if you have any questions.
Hello.
Yes, hello.
Hi, this is Edgar Salinas from CAF in Uruguay. Well, thank you for the presentation. My question is more related to other type of instruments required in the project finance. So we have focused the discussion today on the debt component. I was wondering whether the study or whether in your experience you could share a little bit of let's say equity or other instruments like venture capital or funds. So what would be your opinion on that other side of the financing part?
Then in fact, we did in fact, it reflects back on my discussion with Tawena after training back in July. This was a kind of lender perspective that we have taken into account. Now, in terms of equity, you will find a process which is rather similar in many respects, except funny enough that at the end, because you expose your bank to taking a share in a company first, the money won't come from the same pocket. Then you will take part of your quote unquote earned capital rather than amount of money being made available through your balance sheet. So that one is a big change. And in terms of project appraisal, and like I'm sure you know, everything is about the exit. Then if you ask me about my own experience, and in the energy sector, we were actually having two types of exit. The one through the market, which wasn't our preferred one, and then we were having a put on call arrangements, which were always an issue for whoever got the call or the put, because of the what we call the liability associated to it. And in fact, whoever has a commitment to buy your share has to record it into the balance sheet, which is not ideal. But this would have been our approach. Then from experience, when we took equity at EBRD in any kind of renewable energy projects, it would have been through a put call arrangements agreed at a defined debt to EBITDA ratio as a trigger to define the time where we exit. And it will be a clause like not before year 8, let's say, under conditions to be met, and then we will have an EBITDA multiplier to define the value of our shares. Now, ironically, because of, I'll go back to my first point, what we discussed with Tawena, the term sheet is only about debt investment, not equity investment. Although somehow, yes, it would have been different because I'm thinking out loud, because most of our requirement will have been in the shareholder agreement, you see. Then as a bank, we'll have template shareholder agreements where we will impose to the other shareholders certain behavior, certain conditions, share retention. Then everything will be in the shareholder agreement rather than the loan agreement. Then somehow a different document, although the essence of the requirement will be similar in terms of behavior, standard, but it will be part of the shareholding agreement, yeah, surely.
Okay.
Then what could we do? Because everything is about lending here in the IDFC course that we've done. Will it be right if you ask your question maybe to the other IDFC member, because there might be an interest next year or the year after to discuss capital investment into renewable, you see, because there is clearly a need, but also an upside for investors in doing so.
And one follow-up question unrelated to debt, the debt and equity discussion. And sorry, it is actually outside the scope of renewables, but perhaps it could be related. In the U.S. Energy market, they have several market instruments, especially to incentivize the penetration of renewables, so renewable energy certificates. So I don't know whether that also applies in Europe, but when you analyze the cash flow, which could be a part of the termship to a certain extent, the projected cash flow, obligations like EU ETS allowances, let's say, in other utilities that, for example, a natural gas or utilities that have obligations on their the EU ETS. How is that factoring? Because you know, I mean, this audience and most of the colleagues around the table are climate specialists, climate finance, blended finance, and other colleagues that I see on the list are very passionate about market instruments. What's your take? Does that play an important role? Especially when you do the due diligence in terms of the obligations and the cash intakes and outflows?
Definitely, yeah. In fact, we mentioned it back in July because ironically, your point is very important because it's true that too much maybe potential attention is put on the cash flow arising from the sale of electricity. Whilst you're right to say that there is also commitment obligations, but also source of revenues arising from the other benefit out of renewable energy generation. Now, we mentioned it back in July by saying that there will be one market assessment or one revenue stream assessment out of the sale of electricity. But in parallel, depending on the market where the plant is developed and operated, there will be additional upside or even downside associated to energy production. And we discussed it, however, in all fairness, because we didn't make the presentation specific to any given regulation, we haven't developed, I would say, in detail, a given market. Could it be in Africa, in a country, or in Europe, within the EU? Then we mention it, but again, is that a question to be somehow part for further discussion within the
but the takeaway that I get from your answer is that you have a due diligence and a group of specialists concentrated on the energy market, the PPA, etc., the technicalities of the plan, the system that is being financed, but you would have a separate, perhaps not a separate, but a subcomponent analyzing potential benefits, revenue streams coming from certificates or obligations in the case that you have utilities that have obligations under the allowance system.
And I could add to that you can't be even more right by saying that very often, again, from my own experience, what I found is that many developers have a tendency to only disclose one part of the upside. So basically, they will come to the lender by saying, you know what, a project that sells electricity. What they don't say is that within the environment where the plant is operated, there is other upside, like carbon credit. And in fact, in the concrete examples that I've seen in Zambia, there was some carbon schemes whereby you could find additional upside when developing renewable energy projects. So, in fact, the lessons that I could learn from your question is that not only maybe we would have failed somehow back in July to focus only on the revenues extracted from electricity, but I see also a point that when going beyond discussing carbon trading on all these type of things, there will be a point for the lenders to make sure that they capture all the revenues on all the upside which arise from a given project. Because it's true that many developers internationally almost hide a part of the upside, which is, by the way, not only a damage for the lender because they lose on the revenue, but it's not also fair because if it happens that the project doesn't deliver, it becomes a liability. And then you become exposed to the consequences of not having reduced the CO2 emission, for example, as planned, which is an issue. Very fair point.
Yeah, good.
But now, with what we will be doing, will it be right, Elodie, if we summarize this question for Tawana, so that maybe next year there is a dedicated, I would say, exchange on this subject, so that experts could exchange on what they've seen and what are the kind of importance in terms of revenue generation, but also liability associated to this project. That's a very good question. Do you know the person who asked the question? Because then it will be helpful if we put in touch Tawana with you, sir, so that they could refine the theme.
Who asked the question? Because we couldn't see on the screen.
Hi, it was Edgar Salinas from CAF, a Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, based in Montevideo, Uruguay.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, sir. So, if you agree, then now we will move to the term sheet template. And thanks to your question, sir, I will just repeat that we are focusing here on debt. Debt from the perspective of an investment where we look at the cash flow arising from the sale of electricity. As the gentleman said, the term sheet will have been substantially different, obviously, for an equity investment, because we will have a term sheet for a shareholder agreement rather than a loan agreement. But besides that, there will be also other conditions arising from any specific arrangements in relation to carbon trading or whatever, so that you capture the essence of it in terms of revenues, but also in terms of liability, because it becomes an obligation to produce. Now, the template you've got is, I hope it does work in PDF when you scroll on the, okay, because I tried it on Word, but it's good to know that it works as well on PDF. Then we will explain, but it's, I would say, self-explanatory, the way the document has been structured. And it's obviously meant to help you as bankers and potential lender to a renewable energy project, somehow position yourselves and set your requirements. Then what we tried to do was to have notes that explain the purpose and the importance of a given item. But at the same time, you will see that we try to highlight the differences arising from renewable energy investments. Now, as an example, but we will come back to projects definition later. But basically, you will see that the term sheet is organized as a kind of set of definitions which define the borrower, which is the entity to whom you will be lending, the sponsor, which is those who have developed the project, and luckily you will also most likely be a shareholder. And we gave the example of project because we'll come back to that one. And by highlighting, then you will scroll with your mouse, and automatically the definition will appear. And then the document, as we said, is structured with general terms and conditions, and we move to the specific terms of your loan. Then come the requirements from the bank with a covenant, and there is the financial obligations before the reporting. Then every point is hopefully explained and defined, and we try on don't quote us on this point, because it's more as a reflection of people who've made an investment, and your bank will be obviously solely deciding on what is reasonable or not. And then whatever comments we provided here shouldn't be taken by the letter and come as a best practice. It's just an example based on concrete cases that we've seen. Then you've seen the document is around 20 pages long plus the notes. And what we'll be doing now, because we felt that it would be interesting to focus on a few matters which we felt are more important than others, because they reflect very well what the term sheet is about, how important is it to negotiate it in the context of project risk. And then this will be the generic items that we will mention. The one about the security, because obviously there is this trade-off between taking more risk on the project, but still getting the recourse or / the security. The cross default, which is also another way of finding a recourse with the risk on the benefit, and something that you will be much more exposed to when considering project exposure by opposition to corporate loans, which is waivers and non-compliance, because it will become your way as a lender to guide your project and your borrower to what you want. But there is a need then to make sure that when declaring an event of default or potential event of default, you measure the consequence of it, and you could then drive your client to what you expected him or her to do further to the default. And then we'll do the same exercise to covenants which are specific to renewable energy projects, such as the project definition and the ratio definition, the levels and the calculations. Now, securities and what we're trying to achieve. Here, why is it important? It's just because we go back to our introduction. You remember, we say that all our presentation today is about how the bank could take project risk by opposition to, let's say, collateral lending or a typical corporate loan, where in fact you take the risk on a business that very often you know already, rather than taking project risk. Therefore, in the context of project finance, your security, at least the security package, is not granted, and you have to design it to achieve your objectives. With one consideration in mind, obviously, your security package shouldn't be designed in a way that substitutes to collaterals, because if you end up in the very same position by saying that, for example, that you want security over properties, land, or whatever outside the project, in fact, in essence, you have just recreated collaterals. Then here, the purpose is very much to look at security from the perspective of taking direct risk exposure to a renewable energy project. Then, unlike collaterals where you will value your collaterals, and sometimes it's even, as we said, mandatory, and I know of certain regulatory framework where the banks are meant to only lend if they have an amount of collateral which exceed twice or three times the loan amount. But if we assume that you are allowed to take direct risk to a project, you may want, in fact, to look not at collaterals, but rights through your security to take control over the company, or not only the assets of the company, which then brings you in a totally different approach where you don't value security by reference to the value of the assets, but by the amount of the cash flow that will be generated from these assets. And in many cases, the value of the cash flow, or even if you discounted them, will be higher than the salvage value of the assets as they stand. Hence, and we could see here a benefit arising from project finance, which in fact allow you to take some security on an operating plant, which has a limited value in terms of pure asset, but a higher value in terms of cash flow. And therefore, you boost the possibility of your client, but also of the sector, to invest more, because by doing so, you valued future revenues instead of the real net value of the assets. Now, two ways of looking at securities. Then they could be defensive or offensive. Then offensive, it's much more in the view of you lender taking control. It's you exercising your right. I mean, you imagine a situation where default was confirmed, and then you decided to step in, and you exercise your security, and you would like, by the way, could it be looking after the cash flow of the company or looking at the value of the assets? You will be looking at extracting money out of the business. But a security could also be defensive. I give you an example. In my past life, financing conventional power plants, we will have pledged turbines. Then you would think, what a turbine, a steam turbine in the middle of nowhere that weighs tons, what will be the value of it? Because it's not even the value of the metal that is located, as we said, in the middle of nowhere. However, by doing so, you prevent others from stepping in and operating the plant. Then you should really see securities as a value for yourselves, offensive, or defensive, more like something you put in place to prevent others from acting against your assets. Then basically, it might be enough in a defensive position to pledge the power line or to pledge a substation, because you know that without the line, without the substation, nobody could operate the plant without your consent. And this might be what you are looking for. However, in both ways, or in both, I would say, situation, bear in mind that you will have to make sure that in your given jurisdiction, you have the right as a lender to pledge certain assets, but more importantly, to exercise your rights without some, I would say, intervention or some third party stepping in. Then very often, at the minimum, for energy-related assets, would you have to seek a consent from the regulator, even if your is a license, for example, of the board says that there will be a right to transfer. It's very unlikely that it will not be subject to a regulator. So basically, everything about security will still have to be reviewed in the light of the applicable regulation to value the effectiveness of such a security, because you should make sure that you will not be prevented from stepping in or from exercising your rights. Now, for security, but you will see we'll do the same for the other themes. What we did, we highlighted a section of the term sheet, and we will not spend too much time because we're already running short of time, but it's just to tell you what we have tried to do in this with this template. So we listed all the general type of securities that one may consider for any project finance. And then we highlighted the particular challenges or issues arising in the case of renewable energy when you structure your security package. If we take then the first one, which is a mortgage on the assets, here there is something very specific to renewable. To give an example, that registration in many countries is expensive and slightly cumbersome, slightly being an understatement. Then, as a consequence, many developers will tell you, you know what, rather than coming every day with a new asset registered with the registry, whatever, or whoever is in charge of it, what we will be doing, we will only do it when the plant will be completed, which is fine. However, as you could appreciate, you will be naked throughout the project construction until COD, or commencement of production date, which is quite a risk. So, while you will be hearing the concern of your client, you might be willing to ensure that you are covered appropriately, at least for the same amount, before the mortgage and assets is put in place with the official registry. The same on the bank account. Here we listed a pledge on all the bank account. Here what will be very important is to ensure that the pledge is exercised through a bank which is holding the account that you trust, and second, that the currency of such account is acceptable to you. Basically, in a country, as you might have heard, I worked 4 years in Morocco. A dirham account in Morocco worth almost close to nothing, because the dirham is not convertible without the consent of the office d'échange. Hence, you might, if you pledge the account of the borrower, during the negotiation, ensure that these accounts are in hard currency, so that you pledge as a value, because otherwise the value of it will be substantially reduced. Then, if we continue with the discussion on security, and again, here it's more as a matter of example, then insurance is also an interesting example for you as a lender if you start looking at project finance. If we take the example of insurance, you don't want, and here again, I will draw on my experience. It was an interesting project in Belarus where my client was more interested to siphon all the insurance proceeds after a gas turbine exploded, rather than use the bond or the insurance proceeds to rebuild the plant. Then, by pledging the insurance, what we managed to do was to exercise or force the client to repair rather than extract the cash. Because obviously, as EBRD, what we wanted is to have more power being produced in a clean, sustainable way, rather than having a client which made money out of a gas turbine explosion, because in that case it exploded. But just to give you an example, that by structuring your security, you could also influence the way you would like the project to adapt to your requirement in the case of insurance. Obviously, if something goes wrong, hence the importance of assigning all the proceeds to you so that you could force your borrower act in a certain way. Another example would be enterprise mortgage, which is not available in all jurisdictions, which is rather than having to list every bits and pieces that make the plant, to refer to a business. Because obviously, if you are operating in a place where a pledge or any kind of security could only be exercised by reference to a list, you might easily forget the pen and paper that will be used by whoever is working on the site. And usually there is this idea of referring to a business rather than an asset list as a way to mitigate the risk of forgetting something important. On the pledge of share, which by the way go back to the gentleman's question on equity investment, by pledging the share will enter into kind of uncharted territory of capital investments where the pledge will be thought, but considering that pledging the share means that the bank will inherit the asset, but also the liability associated with the power plant or the business, whatever it is, which means that de facto, you as a lender might have your reputation tarnished or exposed because you will become one of the shareholders, and de facto, people will come to you. And if there is any issue, could it be environmental, social, because you become the shareholder. So just to say that securities have to be structured in a way that provide you with the right comfort, the right amount of money in case of something happen, but also allow you to steer the project the way you want, because you have the right, but obviously you have also the possibility not to exercise your right, and then to force your client act in the way you believe is the best for your interest as a lender, but also the interest of the project or the interest of the country. Now, another very interesting substitute to corporate lending, or let's say collateral securities, and the type of project that will be opposite to project risk, is the cross default. And there is a temptation for many lenders who is involved or considering project finance to see with cross default a very useful and effective tool to act as a substitute. Basically, the cross default, for those who are not aware, is this idea that the default on your loan will create a default on other investments that you as a lender, but also your co-lenders and co-financers might have with the same sponsor, the same shareholder. And then obviously it's a very useful tool because it creates a unity and consolidate all the force of the lenders together vis-a-vis a sponsor. But the downside of it is that it could contaminate your project, basically having an event of default on another project you never heard of because it's financed by one of the co-lenders, contaminating your project. Then you end up being in trouble because there is a default on another one. On here, without quoting anyone, but still mentioning the IDFC, they are very good at it. And even, again, reflecting on what I've done at EBRD, even at the expense of other IFI. And this is quite a pain, I'm sorry for my French, but it's even more because you end up having IFC calling on an event of default because of a project in a completely different continent. And then you are stuck in your project, although it's totally unrelated, because they leverage on all their pipeline to create an event of default on everything. Then again, it's a clause which need to be carefully worded, because not only it could impact, I would say, your attempt to finance other projects with the same sponsor, but also as a consequence on your own investments arising from whatever has been done by co-lenders. The next one, which is also very much of a concern when you do project finance. Here, there isn't like a reference to a single item in the term sheet, and it's more for all the conditions that you will see listed in the term sheet. Then bankers, to be nice to their management, like to, I would say, over-engineer that term sheet. And then it's always welcome, at least when you meet with your credit department or you are seeking an approval, to come with a long list of requirements, because your credit department will say, well, you are a good banker because you looked at all the conditions and it's very good. There is, however, an issue here on, rather than simplifying or streamlining the discussion with the support team by just adding up requirements after requirements, then it might be, in fact, better for your project to negotiate internally, so to streamline the bank requirement, so that you avoid a scenario where your project becomes somehow out of control. Basically, the idea is that every covenant should be perceived as an early warning. Then a covenant is not structured as a way to influence the behavior of your borrower. The borrower is supposedly compliant with everything under the base case. Give you an example, many of my colleagues from the environmental department were trying to do good stuff. Then they will come with endless requirements about community development, gender development, or whatever. And they felt that a covenant will force the borrower to act properly. Sure, but the problem is that if you haven't ensured that your borrower is willing to do it and is capable of doing it, you might end up in default. And then even the borrower will think, you know what, I will sign off because I don't care, and they will be forced to waive it, which is not really much what should be done, you see. Then the idea should be to use the covenant as an early warning, rather than something to influence your client. So if we go through what you should be doing when setting your requirements, and you should be looking at this next, the likelihood of the borrower to comply. Second, the ability of the borrower to cure default. And give you an example, whatever happened on the accounts happened. Then if there is a requirement in relation to financial performances, it won't be changed because it happened, you see. Then it will be very important when you structure a financial covenant that you could make sure that the year after conditions are met, so that the borrower comply. If it can't, it's better to even prepare the waiver in advance. Third will be the consequences of such a default. To give you an example here, there is a temptation to have the same set of covenants, or in fact to not have covenants which are time-based by reference to construction versus operation. And again, from experience, construction, it's a time where the bank is at risk. And basically, because usually you can't disburse when a default arises, you might end up by having a covenant improperly structured, killing yourself or harming your project because you stop yourself from disbursing, although it has nothing to do. Then again, from experience, I was never ever covenanting an environmental requirement before the plant is operational, because I knew that environmental requirements will hardly be met, in particular when they include social dimension. And then it was important to make sure that the plant would be operational, and then we could use acceleration as a remedy, but not to stop disbursement because you end up killing yourselves. And finally, it's very important to be fully confident and fully aware of the ability of a bank to waive a default. And here again, I will call from my concrete experience. I was co-financing a project with the World Bank in Albania. And stupidly enough, if I may say, the World Bank declared default. And they didn't realize that by declaring a default, they had to go back to their board, which was like a 6 months process. Whilst at EBRD, it happens that a default could be cured by management, not by the board. So again, declaring a default on the extent of the default, one has to check who could waive it, so that you don't trap yourself in a situation which would be harmful for the project. Now, with the last few minutes we've got, we'll go through the covenants which are specific to renewable. And then we highlighted, no point going back to it, the definition of projects. Then, like for any investment, the project will be used to determine the use of proceeds, because you could only invest in something related to the project. It's also legally very important in the sense that it's usually the reference made for the securities, in the sense that if you want to stay within the spirit of project finance, your security must be associated to the project capital P, not outside the project. Otherwise, you are moving towards mortgage / collaterals. And then the important thing will be, and this is where we get to renewable, to really find a balance between a level of detail that gives you enough confidence that you are including everything, or not a level of detail that will prevent you from adapting yourself to the new situation. Basically, you might have a change in the capacity of the plant being installed. Is that 51 or 52 megawatts? Better define it at 60 megawatts because you will always be within the framework of your project. But all in all, the lessons learned from renewable investment project is that it's very important to include all the elements that are necessary, if it's not essential, for your power plant operation. And although you might not finance as a lender the line on the substation, but usually you will always be better off including the line on the substation in the project definition, so that even if your borrower is not responsible, but a delay or a non-performance on the substation could trigger an event of default or could trigger some action from your end. Because if you exclude them and they happen to be creating the problem, you will have little, if any, recourse because it's not part of the project. So very important in renewable investment project because you will be reliant on third party than to have, I would say, a holistic and broad definition of project. And now back to, you remember back in July, we spent a lot of time around the SCR, the way it's calculated, and it's very much pivotal in project finance, but even more so for renewable investment. Then the debt service coverage ratio is equivalent to debt EBITDA in corporate finance. And in project finance, DSCR is the kind of alpha and omega of our financial covenant. Now, for us, by reference to what we learned in July, it will be very important, but the first one is obvious, to have a DSCR calculation date consistent with the release of audited account, both in terms of timing and frequency. Then if you have, let's say, a 6 months account being prepared by your auditor 6 months after the close of a semester, you can't have a calculation date before, because obviously the data won't be available. Then frequency must be consistent with accounting period. On the second, on this one is back to what we learned in July. The DSCR level must be set at a level which is consistent with the DSCR target that you use when you sculpt your debt. You remember, we explained that in renewable energy project, usually you will have a PXX, let's say a P90 being used to sculpt your debt, in fact, to assess the amount of cash that will be generated and therefore to define your repayment profile. Obviously, the DSCR you use to sculpt your debt must be more ambitious than the one you impose through your covenant, because otherwise you create de facto a default by not allowing your project to be in compliance. Now, what are these levels? Then DSCR in the covenant will be used to impose a minimum debt service coverage ratio to be met by your project throughout, but it will also be a test to allow repayment of junior debt / dividend payment. Then whatever will happen, you will always have these 3 levels, and you will have the minimum DSCR, which is the absolute level you impose on your project to be met each every year or each every 6 months, which will have to be lower than the one you use to profile your debt repayment, you being senior lender. That will be again lower than the test you will impose to the junior lenders or for dividend payment. And again, as you could see, this cascade of tests are typical to renewable. In particular, the P90 target DSCR, which is unique to renewable financing. And the same will happen in the next slide for the forecast ratio, because here, as you could figure out, everything is historical, but there is also very often ratios which are calculated based on forecast. And 2 of them are commonly used, and you have the forecast DSCR, which is the same as the one we have historical, and it's 1 year, 6 months, but it's for the next occurrence. And we have one which is called the non-life coverage ratio, which is in fact an idea where you capitalize the total amount of cash flow and you net it off by the total amount of debt or interest to be repaid. It's more like an average. But in any case, what is very important for you as a lender is to appreciate the fact that as soon as you touch on the forecast, you need to agree with your borrower on the assumptions that will be used on the calculation model. And without these 2 assumptions, in fact, your ratio worth nothing. The reason being is that if you disagree or if you haven't agreed upfront on how you calculate the forecast, obviously, in particular, in case of non-compliance, you will end up in endless discussion with your borrower that will disagree or challenge your assumptions. And this ratio looks very appealing seen from credit or management perspective, but I could just warn you that they also include some prerequisite on pre-requirements which are not always easy to put in place. In particular, the financial model, because it required an independent entity to maintain it, to update it, and also to agree on the forecast. And imagine that you will have, for example, if you have a price index on inflation or whatever, to agree on an inflation forecast. You will have to again agree possibly on currency exchange rate looking forward for 10 years. Who knows? Then this comes with a lot of prerequisites, although appealing, they are not easy to enforce. But I think with that in mind, sorry, I was a bit longer than, no, I was just on time. But I don't know if you would be having questions, and you may not have had a chance to scroll through the document because you just got it, but at least regarding the few items that we discussed, if there is any question on something people would like to change about.
So now is your time. If you have any question or want to share some of your experience, please go ahead.
A round of applause.
A round of applause.
I'm joking.
It's going to be a small round of applause. I don't have too many participants left. I see a question in the chat. Yeah, not the question. Thank you from Oussama.
Oh, thank you, Oussama. The famous Oussama. Oussama still in Paris, I assume. Yeah.
I assume.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Excellent. Yes, I'm still in. And nice to see you again, all of you.
Thank you.
Nice to hear from you again. Anyone else has any question? But in case you have, I think we are available.
Yeah, we are available because Oussama will confirm, but there might be some questions because the term sheet is a bit long for sure, but it's whatever it is. But if there are questions regarding the notes on any kind of exchange on the document, it's more than welcome. We'll try to answer. Yeah.
So thank you everyone for your participation today. I hope you learned a lot and you'll find the term sheet very useful. So the webinar was recorded, so you will receive the recording afterwards. And as Laurent mentioned, if you have any questions afterwards, please don't hesitate to get back to us. So the next webinar will be end of November and will be organized by the International Energy Agency. And if I recall, will be about hydrogen.
Yeah, interesting. Super. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good afternoon.